There is a mistake soft people make over and over again. They listen to what people say. They listen carefully. They collect promises. They replay reassurance. They remember apologies. They cling to labels like loyalty, honesty, love, friendship, respect. And because the words sound good, they keep trying to believe the person. That is how they get used. That is how they get betrayed. That is how they spend years inside illusions that were visible from the beginning to anyone cold enough to watch behavior instead of language. Because words are cheap. Patterns are expensive. Words can be chosen in seconds. Patterns take time to fake. Words are often designed for effect. Patterns are what remain after performance gets tired. That is one of the first brutal laws of human nature. People will tell you who they want to be seen as, but their patterns will always tell you what they actually are. And if you keep trusting the first over the second, then you are volunteering to be deceived. Machiavelli understood this without sentiment. He understood that human beings are not ruled by noble self-descriptions. They are ruled by appetite, necessity, fear, self-interest, convenience, and perception. That is why he could look at a smiling face and still ask the right question. What does this person repeatedly do when the moment costs them something? That is the real question. Not what they said when the room was soft. Not what they promised when losing you felt possible. Not what they claimed when they needed your trust. What do they keep doing? That is where the truth lives. I learnt this watching a man destroy his own peace with hope. He kept telling me, but she said she cared. And she probably did, in the moment she said it. But her pattern was distance, inconsistency, selective warmth, and emotional convenience. She said care. She repeated absence. He listened to the sentence and ignored the rhythm. That is what weak people do. They fall in love with statements and then build excuses around repeated behavior that clearly contradicts them. That is why human nature keeps humiliating them. Because human nature does not hide in isolated moments. It reveals itself through repetition. A liar can tell the truth once. A manipulator can sound sincere once. A disloyal friend can show up once. A selfish partner can cry once. A weak man can act strong once. Once means nothing. Pattern means everything. And the more painful part is this. Most people do not lie only to you. They lie to themselves first. That is why their words often sound convincing. They call control care. They call envy concern. They call disrespect honesty. They call avoidance needing space. They call selfishness protecting my peace. They call using you leaning on support. If you only listen to language, you will drown in confusion. If you study patterns, confusion dies fast. Because pattern has no poetry. Pattern is blunt. Pattern says, this person cools when they need something. This person becomes warm only when access is threatened. This person apologizes beautifully and repeats the exact behavior. This person praises you in private and undermines you in public. This person says they love honesty, but punishes truth when it inconveniences them. This person says they respect you, but only when you are useful, soft, or easy to control. That is the law. The mouth sells. The pattern reveals. If this already feels like a truth you learned the hard way, comment patterns. The first reason you should never trust words more than patterns is because words are often built for the moment, while patterns are built from the person. A moment can lie. A person, over time, cannot. Anyone can say the right thing when pressure enters the room. Anyone can become tender when they feel you pulling away. Anyone can sound mature when they sense consequences coming. Anyone can suddenly speak the language of accountability when losing access becomes real. But the real test is always the same. What happens after the conversation? What happens after the apology? After the tears? After the promise? After the reassurance? After the deep talk at 2 a.m.? After the "I understand now," that is where the truth stops performing and starts walking. I remember a man telling me about a business partner who kept giving speeches about loyalty, brotherhood, vision, long-term trust, all the right language. But every single time real money entered the room, the pattern changed. Delayed transparency, partial information, strange urgency, selective honesty. He still wanted to believe the speeches because the speeches felt personal. But the pattern was financial self-preservation at his expense. That is when he finally understood. Words are often there to buy time. Patterns are what the person does while buying it. This is what weak men miss. They hear emotion and assume the truth. They hear intensity and assume sincerity. They hear repetition and assume commitment. No, people repeat lies all the time, especially lies that protect their access to you. That is why the world is full of men who say, "But he promised, but she said, but they told me," as if language has more authority than repeated action. It does not. Words are often the costume. Pattern is the body underneath it. This is why the wise man becomes slow to believe beautiful language from ugly repetition. He does not get hypnotized by emotionally satisfying explanations. He watches whether the explanation changes the behavior. If it does not, then the explanation was never true. It was anesthesia. That is why most apologies are in the hands of weak people. Not transformation, sedation. A way to calm your nervous system so the pattern can continue without immediate consequence. There was a woman I once watched do this with frightening precision. Every time she crossed a line, she became incredibly articulate, deeply reflective, emotionally aware. She could explain her wounds, her fear, her intentions, her stress, her confusion, her trauma, her regret. And every time the man in front of her felt moved by the language, he thought complexity meant sincerity. But the pattern never changed. Same behavior, same chaos, same betrayal, wearing slightly better vocabulary. That is when it hit. Self-awareness without altered behavior is just more sophisticated dysfunction. That line applies everywhere. A person can know exactly why they hurt you and still keep hurting you. Their insight is not your safety. Their pattern is. That is why you should never let words outrank repetition in your mind. Because repetition is where motive becomes visible. The second reason is even darker. People use words to manage your perception, while patterns reveal what they are managing you for. That is the game. A manipulator does not need you to believe every sentence forever. Only long enough to keep the structure intact. Long enough to keep access. Long enough to keep trust. Long enough to keep the advantage. Long enough to keep you emotionally available while they continue doing what they were always doing. That is why words often come dressed as relief. Trust me. You know me. I'd never do that. You're overthinking. That's not what I meant. You know how much I care. I'm here for you. I would never betray you. Maybe. But what is the pattern? Because manipulative people love using language to interrupt pattern recognition. They know if they can get you emotionally focused on the sentence, you may stop studying the structure. You may stop noticing the repetition. You may even begin doubting your own eyes because the words sound so clean. This is where many good people get destroyed. They think suspicion is cynicism. So they keep giving the benefit of the doubt to patterns that have already earned caution. That is not kindness. That is self-abandonment, disguised as moral patience. Machiavelli understood that men are simple enough and often driven enough by immediate need, that deception works far more often than it should. Why? Because people want the comforting story more than the uncomfortable pattern. They want to believe what protects their hope, their relationship, their investment, their image of the other person. That is why pattern reading is not pessimism. It is self-defense. Think about how this shows up in friendships. A man says, "I've got your back." Strong sentence. Masculine sentence. But then every time your name comes up in rooms where you are absent, he becomes quiet. Every time your success becomes visible, the jokes get sharper. Every time you need something real, the replies get slower. Every time your standards rise, the warmth gets weird. What matters more? That one line he says when looking you in the face, or the recurring pattern he reveals when no applause is available? The pattern. Always the pattern. Because loyalty is not what a man says under direct eye contact. Loyalty is what he repeatedly does when there is advantage in doing otherwise. That is how you test all human claims. Not in comfort, in cost. A person's real nature appears when truth becomes inconvenient, when loyalty becomes expensive, when discipline becomes boring, when honesty threatens their image, when your growth triggers their insecurity, when boundaries remove their access. That is when the costume starts slipping. If you've ever watched words collapse under repeated behavior, comment truth. The third reason you should trust patterns over words is because people accidentally confess through repetition. This is one of the most useful laws of human nature. Most people are not disciplined enough to fake themselves for long. They can perform for a scene, maybe for a month, sometimes for a season. But eventually, habit exposes structure. That is why patterns matter so much. They are not random. They are leaked architecture. A man who repeatedly avoids accountability is telling you something. A woman who repeatedly weaponizes vulnerability is telling you something. A friend who repeatedly disappears when you need depth is telling you something. A co-worker who repeatedly smiles in person and competes in absence is telling you something. A family member who repeatedly calls your independence arrogance is telling you something. Listen, because repetition is confession without self-awareness. I watched this happen with someone who always claimed he was just brutally honest. He liked that identity. It made him feel sharp, real, different from everyone else. But his pattern revealed something uglier. He only became honest downward, never upward. Never with people who could challenge him, never in ways that cost him status. His honesty always targeted softer people, lower risk moments, and places where he could feel powerful. That pattern revealed the truth. He was not courageous. He was cowardly and aggressive in safe directions. One sentence from him would never tell you that. His pattern told you everything. This is why the sharpest observers in life stop being hypnotized by single moments. They stop saying things like, "Well, maybe this time was different," every time a familiar pattern returns in a new costume. They understand that human beings are repetitive. And repetition is not bad in itself. It is simply revealing. The disciplined man repeats discipline. The jealous man repeats undercutting. The disloyal man repeats strategic absence. The insecure man repeats subtle competition. The manipulator repeats confusion. The liar repeats the explanation. The user repeats the need. This is why time is the ally of the intelligent. If you say less and watch longer, people eventually introduce themselves. Not through grand speeches, through rhythm. The way they return, the way they withdraw, the way they frame your growth, the way they handle your boundaries, the way they respond to your silence. That is why silence is such a dangerous tool in human dynamics. Once you stop over-explaining and over-participating, people have more room to reveal their own pattern, and many do it almost immediately. The person who wants access starts becoming impatient. The person who relies on your softness becomes colder. The person who was pretending loyalty becomes inconsistent. The person who envied you starts making small comments that would have passed unnoticed before. Silence does not create these truths. It simply removes the noise that was hiding them. That is why still men often see betrayal earlier than expressive men. They are watching, while others are still narrating. The fourth reason is that words often describe ideals, while patterns reveal priorities. This is a devastating distinction. People speak from the identity they want credited, but they act from the hierarchy that actually governs them. A person may say, family matters most, but their pattern may show comfort matters most. A person may say, I care about honesty, but their pattern may show image matters most. A person may say, I support you, but their pattern may show self-comparison matters most. A person may say, I want peace, but their pattern may show control matters most. This is why words are so seductive. They let people present the version of themselves they admire, but patterns reveal what they truly obey. There was a man who constantly said he respected ambition. He loved talking about growth, discipline, leveling up, and building a future. But every time someone close to him actually became more focused, more selective, more disciplined, his energy changed. He became sarcastic, dismissive, less warm, more likely to joke at their expense. Why? Because he respected ambition as a concept, but in reality, he was ruled by comparison. His pattern betrayed his real master. That is how human beings work. They speak from aspiration. They act from structure, and structure always wins. Machiavelli knew this in political life, but it applies perfectly to personal life too. Men are judged by what appears, what is repeated, and what result follows, not by the beauty of their self-description. So if you want to understand somebody, stop asking only what they believe. Ask what their behavior repeatedly serves. That answer is far more honest. The fifth reason is that trusting words more than patterns makes you betray your own intuition. This is where the real damage happens. Because deep down, most people notice the pattern long before they admit it. They feel the inconsistency. They notice the timing. They notice the tone shift. They notice the strange energy after good news. They notice that apologies change the atmosphere, but not the behavior. They notice that warmth comes and goes according to convenience. They notice the mismatch. But then words arrive. Words soothe, explain, reframe, delay, sedate. And because many people are afraid of the implications of what they already know, they use the words to argue against their own perception. This is how self-trust dies, not in one catastrophic moment, in repeated small betrayals of what you already saw. I knew a man who kept telling himself his business partner was just stressed, that the pattern was obvious. Missing details, shifting stories, selective honesty, disappearing when pressure rose, suddenly becoming persuasive when scrutiny appeared. He saw it. He felt it. But every time his intuition got close to the truth, the partner had a new explanation. And because the explanation sounded reasonable, he kept abandoning the evidence in front of him. By the time the damage fully surfaced, the betrayal had been happening for months. The real loss did not begin with the partner's deception. It began each time he ignored the pattern to stay loyal to the words. That is what you must stop doing. Because every time you trust a sentence more than a rhythm, you train yourself to abandon reality for comfort. Reality is what a person repeatedly does. Comfort is what they repeatedly say. One will save you. The other will usually cost you. That is why strong people become ruthless about this. Not cruel, ruthless in discernment. They stop giving language the authority. Behavior has already been revoked. They stop saying, "But he told me." Once the pattern has become undeniable, they stop defending people against evidence. They stop using empathy as a method of self-erasure. Because empathy without discernment is simply an open door. And some people walk through doors only to empty the room. The sixth reason is that patterns predict the future better than promises ever will. This may be the most practical truth in the entire subject. If you want to know what a person will likely do next, Do not ask what they intend. Study what they repeatedly did when conditions were similar. That is where prediction comes from. Not in fantasy, in repetition. A man who repeatedly disappears under pressure will likely disappear again. A woman who repeatedly becomes warm only when she senses you pulling away will likely do it again. A friend who repeatedly becomes competitive when you are doing well will likely do it again. A relative who repeatedly uses guilt when control is slipping will likely do it again. This sounds obvious once you see it. But weak people keep hoping the next version of the same pattern will turn into a new outcome because the words surrounding it have improved. That is madness. And it is expensive madness. I once watched someone stay in a cycle for years because each return came with better language, better reflection, better insight, better promises. But the structure beneath the relationship never changed. Same instability, same inconsistency, same emotional taxation. The pattern was loyal to itself even while the vocabulary evolved. That is something you must remember. A more intelligent excuse does not equal a transformed person. A more emotional apology does not equal a safer pattern. A more beautiful promise does not equal future consistency. Pattern does not care how elegant the sentence was. Pattern only cares what repeats. That is why wise men become almost boring in this area. They stop needing drama to make decisions. They stop waiting for the giant betrayal, the perfect confession, the smoking gun. They read repetition and move accordingly. If the pattern is enough, the pattern is enough. That level of clarity saves years. Years of overthinking. Years of doubting yourself. Years of trying to decode what was never actually hidden. Because the truth about most people is not hidden in a vault. It is sitting in plain sight in what they repeatedly do. The seventh reason you should never trust words more than patterns is because hidden envy often speaks support while behaving opposition. This is one of the coldest parts of human nature. People will say they are happy for you while subtly shrinking around your growth. They will say they support you while undercutting your name in rooms you are not in. They will say they want the best for you while becoming emotionally distant the moment your standards rise beyond what still serves them. That is why words are so dangerous in the hands of envious people. Envy almost never introduces itself honestly. It borrows the language of warmth while leaking the energy of resentment. I watched a man rise slowly over a couple of years. More discipline, more clarity, more restraint, better habits, better finances, better presence. One of the people around him kept saying all the right things. I'm proud of you. You're evolving. You deserve more. But the pattern told a different story. Public jokes became sharper. Private warmth became thinner. Good news got awkward silence. His growth was always followed by some small verbal attempt to drag him back toward who he used to be. That was not supported. That was envy trying to survive inside politeness. And if you trust the words more than the pattern there, you will stay blind far too long. This is why pattern reading protects not only your peace, but your future. Because envious people do not always attack directly. Sometimes they simply create drag. Slow poison. Subtle undercutting. Emotional friction. Enough to keep you slightly off-center while they keep smiling. That is why the strategic man watches reactions to his growth more than the sentences attached to it. The pattern never lies for long. If this exposes something you've seen before, comment clarity. The final reason is simple. Trusting patterns over words is how you stop living in fantasy. And fantasy is what keeps people trapped in bad relationships, bad business deals, bad friendships, bad family dynamics, bad cycles, bad hopes, and bad explanations long after reality has already delivered its verdict. Words keep fantasy alive. Patterns end it. That is why so many people resist seeing patterns clearly. Because once you do, certain emotional illusions die. You can no longer say, maybe they didn't mean it, when the same disrespect has happened 6 times. You can no longer say, "They care deep down," when the repeated behavior shows convenience, not care. You can no longer say, "I just need to be more understanding," when your understanding has become the exact space their dysfunction lives inside. At some point, seeing clearly becomes more merciful than hoping. That is maturity, not cynicism, not paranoia. Pattern literacy. The ability to say, "I heard your words, I noticed your intention, but I trust repetition more than emotion." That is a powerful thing, because once you start living that way, your life gets cleaner. You choose faster, leave sooner, reveal less, trust more accurately. Stop over-explaining. Stop negotiating with obvious patterns just because the language around them is beautiful. You stop calling confusion depth. You stop calling inconsistency complexity. You stop calling deception a misunderstanding. And you stop building emotional loyalty to people whose behavior has already disqualified them. That is freedom. Real freedom. Not from people, from illusion. So the next time somebody says the perfect thing, do not get hypnotized. Listen. Then look harder. What is the pattern? What repeats when no one is watching? What repeats when things get uncomfortable? What repeats when your boundaries appear? What repeats when your success becomes visible? What repeats when they no longer need something from you? What repeats when truth costs them? Those answers matter more than any sentence ever will. Because the mouth can decorate, the pattern can only reveal. And once you understand that, you stop trusting words more than patterns. You start trusting what human nature has been trying to show you all along, not in the promise, in the repetition. That is where the truth lives.